All right, we're going to talk about the IT monitoring and assurance practices for the board and senior management. And beyond them, it is important that all stakeholders, which would be the board, senior management, and everybody else, provide input into the decision-making process about IT governance. So it's a little bit more than just good management practice. It's also a framework of IT controls, but it's also a management system that's about the stewardship of the IT resources on behalf of the stakeholders. Now, IT governance really starts in the hands of the board of directors and the executive management, as it should. It is their job to run this particular business or organization. Now, even though risk management and compliance monitoring in our components, it should be noted that governance should be focused on delivering value and measuring performance. Notice, of course, what I just said there. We've talked about needing risk management and compliance monitoring of our components, and we did that through the audited process. But beyond just the auditing process, governance is more than that. It is overly focused on making the company better. And again, that's where the value and the measuring of performance comes in. Having ways to be able to look at that, monitor it, watch it, and improve it. Now, you should think of IT governance as a shared management process. By shared management, what we're saying is that it's not up to the IT department by itself to make all the decisions about how it should be governed. In fact, if allowed to just be self-managed like that, you may lose the perspective of the goal of IT, which is the support of the overall business. And it allows poor decisions basically to be held directly on those responsible for making those poor decisions, and they may be considered poor decisions because of how they are designed to integrate with the overall business support. In other words, it might not have been from some perspective to IT a poor decision, but when considered in the overall plans of trying to meet the organization's objectives, it may have been decided that that was a bad decision. The other reason for shared management is that this way, based on the decisions that all of the management was involved in, the board and the executive management, that means that different departments can't solely place blame against IT if there is poor performance. Because again, it wasn't just IT that made the decision, but one of a shared process. IT governance is designed to ensure that the IT performance meets the objectives of aligning IT with the organization's objectives. And you've heard me say that a few times now. It's very important to remember that they are designed to be integrated together. IT should enable an enterprise to exploit new opportunities and maximize benefits from those opportunities. The goal of having the IT governance framework is to help align it with the accepted best practices, and it's important to know that the framework should be made up of a variety of structures, processes, and relational mechanisms. And the reason we say that is that every organization's IT systems and services are going to be different. And so there might not be any one framework that encompasses everything for every company, but instead made up, as we said, a variety of these structures and processes and mechanisms that meets the need of helping us in working with and managing IT. The broader processes of IT governance framework then, and again broad because it's so hard to narrow it down to one company. Number one is that IT resource management, which focuses on the inventory of the resources as well as the risks involved with those resources, should be a part of that framework. Another part of the framework is a performance measurement to make sure that the IT resources are performing as they're expected to, as well as being able to deliver a benefit to the organization. Another part of the framework is compliance management when it comes to regards for the implementation of processes, making sure that they're compliant and meeting all of the regulatory laws and regulations, as well as, of course, the objectives of the business. As a part of the best practices for IT governance, your goal should be to integrate these good practices to make sure that IT supports the business objectives. All right, so you've heard that again. That's apparently a big clue for us, right? For example, if you want to make sure the organization is taking full advantage of its information, and to do so, making sure that it's getting maximum benefits. All right, so that's where we think about it. What does exactly that mean? How do I know that the organization is taking full advantage of its information and getting maximum benefits? And a lot of it depends on the type of organization that you are. But the importance here is in the communication process. You know, if I'm thinking about the type of information I might have and the ability to do some data mining to gather the correct information to allow for the maximum benefits. So if I was trying to come up with a way of pricing an object that I sell as a corporation, and I'm trying to come up with what's a good price. Well, one of the things you might want to know is what it actually cost you to build that object. And that's all the materials, the labor, the shipping to get those materials there, the taxes that occur at each of those processes. And you know, if I don't have the right information or full information, I might be pricing the information wrong and not charging what I should to get the maximum benefits. Yeah, that's just a quick example of just, you know, what we're trying to say. That's some of the things we're trying to do through the use of having best practices, making sure that we can take advantage of our information for our company's maximum benefits. You can also think of this as far as the best practices, as a structure of relationships and processes that direct and control moving the organization towards the achievement of its goal. Now, there is always going to be a risk of balancing, of trying to balance the risk versus the return over the IT process. And we're going to get into some more discussions about that as we're going to focus kind of on, when we see risks and we try to reduce the risks, what kind of return do we get out of that? And if we add new equipment, we're improving or changing IT, we're introducing new risks, and does what we get out of return help, overcome those new risks and those types of things. But that's another, again, a part of what we would look at for best practices. Now, IT governance has become very important in the recent years because, let's face it, it's really tightly woven into the rest of our organization. And we're looking for a better return on our IT investments. Of course, we may also have to conform to regulatory laws and other requirements that tell us that we have to proceed in certain ways when it comes to our IT investments. We may see increasing complexity of a lot of IT-related risks, and it's important for us to be able to continually find better methods to monitor and improve these critical IT activities in order for us to remove or lower risk to get a better value. And that's one of the things that we're hoping to get from IT governance. So as we look at areas to focus on, or what I guess you could just call them focus areas for IT governance, of course, one is the strategic alignment. That's the alignment of the business and IT plans meeting the organization's objectives, and of value delivery is the next one, making sure that IT can meet the goals of the promised benefits. This could involve a study of the strategy, optimizing costs, and validating the value of IT. But more importantly, what we're hoping to be able to say is, we said if you got us this, and this technology, that this would optimize costs and be of value. Now, I'm going to tell what I think is a kind of a tragic story for the taxpayers of a city, but this is my opinion, and I'm not even going to tell you what city it was. But I'll tell you it's a small city with a city employee base of about 150 people. And during the process of the study we were doing for this city, I noticed that they had an IBM mainframe, and I had to ask, why were you using this? And the answer was quite simply to take care of payroll and other information about the city's staff and budgeting with this database solution. And I thought to myself, okay, you've got 150 people. I could almost do that on an Excel spreadsheet. But what it came down to is that the one IT person they had retired from IBM, and that's what they knew how to use. And so the city, when they came up with a budget, said, what do you need to support IT? He said, I need an IBM mainframe. So they, $250,000 later, bought one. All right. Was that a good strategy to optimize costs and validate the value of IT? And I'm thinking to myself, at that price of $250,000, what they could have bought or saved over the price of a single server with Windows operating system, maybe even a third-party software package to be able to help them with the issues that they were facing with accounting. That's, I know, an extreme case. It is a true case. And it got even better. The person was going to retire again, right? Second retirement within a couple of years, would have left this small city with probably nobody else around who knew how to utilize mainframes. Anyway, so you get the picture, right? That's kind of some of the focus areas, right? Strategic alignment. Was IT's plans aligned with the organization's objectives? And some of you might have said it doesn't matter, it was government. It does matter, right? We all have budgets. We all want to make the best value. And did it give value delivery? And of course, the answer there was, in my opinion, and would have been my recommendation prior to the purchase, would have been don't buy it. But anyway, that's how you kind of look at those. And that's the areas, the focus areas that we have with IT governance. Making them work together, not letting one part of it, IT, say, I need to spend $250,000, and the other part saying, we need you to manage these employee informations for 150 people, right? We could have come up with a better alignment. As we talk about these focus areas, and I've only hit 2 and I gave you a little example, some of the other focus areas are things like risk management. Now, what's important is to make sure that all are aware of the risks that are involved with IT, as well as knowing what the organization's level of acceptance of risk is going to be. We also focus on resource management, and that is having the right investment in the proper management of the critical IT resources, which could include the infrastructure as well as the people that are working there. Remember, resources are not just hardware, software, machine, that's also the people, the staff that are implementing, supporting IT. Another focus is the area of performance measurement, which is a strategy to track and monitor projects, resource usages, process performance, and to be able to deliver the information that we need. Now, as I said, that there should be a framework with IT governance, and there certainly are several frameworks. The first is COBIT, which is developed by the ISACA to support IT governance by providing a framework. That was the goal. But there's also an ISO certification, which is 27001, and that's a series of standards and best practices to provide guidance to organizations. You also see the IT Infrastructure Library, the ITIL, which is a detailed framework with hands-on information on how to achieve successful service management of IT. There's another ISO 38500, which provides a framework for effective IT governance for those of the highest level of management, for them to be able to understand and fulfill their legal and regulatory obligations. Now, in fact, those 2 ISOs are not competing at all. One, as you just heard, the last one was for the upper management in regards to their obligations, especially with regulatory laws. And the other is for a series of standards and best practices as guidance. All right, the purpose of the frameworks is to help you in finding a function of governance that is going to help you with everything we've just talked about. Be able to focus on IT as well as on the organization's needs, and being able to have those integrated together, working together to provide an overall better solution for the company as a whole. Well, now where does the auditor come in when it comes to IT governance? IT should be governed, as we said, by best practices to ensure that the organization's information and related technologies are supporting enterprise business objectives, and that's where the auditor comes in. Our goal is to make sure that that is actually occurring. Now, as we've said many times, by today's standards, IT is a very intrinsic part of the business and no longer considered a separate department. You could say that depending on how IT is applied within the enterprise, that it will have an immense effect on whether or not the enterprise will meet its objectives and goals. In these cases, then auditing has a significant role in making IT successful for the organization. One of the main goals of the audit is to give recommendations on how to improve the quality and effectiveness of IT. Again, that is our goal, is to make sure that we're actually seeing those, the IT department being able to provide a better value, to be more efficient, to be more effective. An audit can also help monitor compliance to make sure that IT is in compliance with regulations, regulatory laws, in compliance with meeting those business objectives. We also know that we want to be able to create, through auditing, a report, to be able to report on the IT governance. And to do so means that we have to audit at the highest level in the organization. And sometimes these audits are going to cross departmental boundaries. And certainly can, because as we're, depending on what the scope is of what we're auditing in IT governance, because remember, we were saying that resources are people as well as equipment and software programs. And on the people side, that means we may be crossing over into human resources boundaries, and looking at issues that affect IT governance in how we deal with the people that are supporting IT. Now, an audit should be defined by the scope of work that's going to be done, with a clear definition of the functional areas and issues. And of course, we said at the very beginning, when we talked about what is an actual audit. So it is important to know the boundaries of the audit when we start. That is your scope of work. It should have a clear set of objectives, definitions of what areas we're going to cover and what are the issues. We also need to know who to report to, and that should be identified as the highest level of the organization. We also have to make sure that the auditor has right of access to the information, which could be either internal or external to the organization. Internally should be easy enough to be able to get that right of the access to information. Externally could be a little bit of a trickier issue in case there are some outsourced portions of IT or outsourcing of control of certain applications or controls. But again, we want to make sure that the auditor has the ability to get the information they need to be able to conduct the audit. Now remember that the auditor has to be objective and independent. And if it cannot be done by an internal auditor, then you should consider hiring an objective, independent third party. Now, the IS auditor should be assessing some of the following things. Number one, as I've said many times already in this domain, the alignment of the IS function to the organization's objectives. If the performance objectives are being achieved or not. The auditor should be looking for compliance, as we've said, to regulatory laws and other requirements. We need to look at the control environment of the organization. Look to see if there's any inherent risks within the IS department, and to make sure we have a good understanding on the IT investments and expenditures. Now, one of the things you can think about as a best practice is to create an IT strategy committee. Now, this committee is designed to be able to provide advice on strategy, but also how to help focus on IT's values, risks, and performance. Now, as it sounds like, a lot of you are saying, oh, not another meeting. Okay, so the idea of the committee is to really provide information that is helpful to the upper management or the top levels of management. That's its goal, is to provide advice on strategy, but it also means it needs to have members in this committee that are not just from IT. Because as a strategy, we want to think of the entire business as having its own objectives, of having its own strategy. Now, of course, part of that is for us to focus on how IT can help in the value of getting to those objectives. And so, that's kind of where the committee comes together, because our goal is to say, IT is so critical to so many aspects of an organization. We want to have the input. And during that input, of course, we need to also be able to look at risks, to look at performance, and to be able to come up with a strategy that helps take us into the future. One part of gathering information that you might need to be able to help kind of put things into perspective is the use of what's called an IT Balanced Scorecard, or BSC. That's a process of management evaluation technique that's used in IT governance. And the application of BSC to IT has kind of a three-layered structure to be able to address for the different perspectives. Now, there are different perspectives when it comes to looking at IT. We have the mission, we have the strategies of IT, and the ways of measuring it. When we look at that balanced scorecard and we talk about the mission, there the goal is to deliver economic and effective and efficient IT applications and services, to get a return, a good value of return from the investments we made into IT, and to also help create opportunities to prepare for future challenges. When we look at it from the perspective of strategies, we want to be able to create superior applications and operations. We want to be able to develop partnerships and have better customer service. Partnerships potentially with other companies on outside or third-party locations. We want to be able to increase service levels and maybe even help work with pricing structures. We also want to have strategies to control IT expenses as much as possible. Another goal of IT, as we see technologies and resources change, is that we want to be able to include, if needed, new business capabilities. I remember working on a program for this company that did classification and compensation studies. And, I was, still getting into my whole work as far as being a contractor and a consultant. And I had been working on this existing database program. Now I'm talking about programming work, not auditing work, but I'm just giving you an example of what we would have been looking for. And they had a way of always doing business, of coming up with things like these charts for pay scales and comparisons to other private business, all these little things they did for classification and compensation studies. And what I had done, and this is so contrary to good change control, but it was a very small business, and it was pretty much up to me. And I had put new features and functionality inside this program for the business owner, and this is a repeat customer too of this business owner. And when they were bringing the final reports in, the customer was like, "Oh, I didn't know you could do these things. You didn't have them, 10 years ago when you did our last study." And they said, "Can I do this other stuff?" And suddenly he got the idea, the owner of the company got the idea and says, "Oh, there's some other value, some other business capabilities that are there that IT and IS could bring to us." Or I guess really it was me at the time. And his answer was, "Oh, sure, we can do it," without asking if I actually knew how. But anyway, it was a fun watching that business grow and seeing new places for them to get more value and more billing, and it was great. I enjoyed that kind of a challenge. Well, there's another reason why we might look at a strategy, because we could get new business capabilities and add more value to IT. And another part of the strategy, of course, is training the IT staff, which is what I felt I needed after he came back and said, "Now I needed to do this." Another strategy is the measures, as we said, which is really just finding a way of getting a balanced set of metrics that we can use for IT decisions. And they have to be metrics that have meaning. Not to be confused with that website, Metrics That Matter, but it means the same thing. The metrics have to be a real functional way of measuring something, and they have to have value. I just don't want somebody just checking off numbers just to check it. I want there to be, with each ranking and rating, a set of instructions that says, if you give it this metric, that means that it meets this level of quality, this level of assurance. Meaning that rather than it being subjective, that there's actually something you have to meet to get a certain score. And that's at least one example. There are examples where metrics can be subjective. But anyway, you need to have a way of being able to have a set of metrics that can be helpful in the use of making decisions with IT. Let's talk a little bit about the information security governance. Now, the term security is focused around three areas, which has one of my favorite acronyms, CIA. That stands for the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Now, you can think of these as providing continuity of services as well as protection of information assets. Now, when you think about what it means, confidentiality generally means encryption services. Integrity means that the information hasn't changed, at least accidentally or maliciously. And availability means that you haven't increased security to such a point that nobody can access the information. So it's kind of a good balance. So almost think of it like a triangle, with each side being confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and having that balanced approach. Now, it's important to remember that security in today's world is not bound to the boundaries of the organization. And that's because of the large growth of technologies like cloud computing, the internet, obviously. If you have any type of internet presence or internet connections from inside your network to the outside, your security boundaries have now moved, because you have people that can have access to your technologies quite easily. And even before the days of the internet, if you even had one line with a modem that would pick up and answer the phone, you potentially ran the risk of having people come in and basically begin to take and steal your information. So all of those are things we need to think about when we think of security governance. When we think about the goals of CIA, it's usually being used towards the protection of information. In today's world, information has become one of the most important components of businesses, and that's at almost every organization that's out there. So our task then with information security governance is to provide the necessary protection for information resources. And that's something we now have to raise up to the board level of activities, as well as other governance functions. And in fact, it's very important, I should tell you, that it is at the board level, because in today's world, we should know that our approaches for all purposes of governance should be considered top-down. Now, the top-down approach simply means that the policies and the governance that we're going to put into place has to have support from the very top of the organization. Otherwise, it's really nothing that's enforceable at all. And I'll talk a little bit more about that philosophy as we go on. But that top-down approach basically says that, if I have a rule that says you're not going to download illegal material from your computer at work, and you do download that information, but that was a policy from some, supervisor or department manager, and now so now they want to fire you. But they can't really, because that didn't come from the CEO or the top board of directors as a policy that is enforceable. And so really it had no teeth. Now that I know that, what's to stop me from violating those policies? So, long story of trying to get to the point that we should consider this always in a top-down approach. So the protection of information is no longer going to be focused on just the process of how we gather the information, but in all aspects during the lifetime of that information. To use a phrase that I've used before, we need to think about information, our data, as being protected and secured in motion and at rest. In motion is the transmission of the information. However it's transmitted, by the way, even if it's the old way of networking, I go back to the old way of networking, where we put it on a floppy disk and walked it from my office over to your office so you could put it in your floppy drive. All right, you probably never thought of it that way. I could go back to the days of punch cards where we had a program spit out a bunch of cards and then we'd feed them in. Anyway, now I'm getting to age myself. Anyway, in motion, at rest, of course, a lot of that's encryption. And that's some of the things we consider about the protection of information. As I said, it's no longer just on how did it get gathered or where did I store it, but all aspects of that information during the lifetime of the information. So the focus then is to have full protection of information. And again, that's because of the vast ability people have to access information from all parts of the world or to illegally intercept information. We can go on with stories about an FBI agent whose work laptop, was stolen from the backseat of their car. And the information about agents and undercover programs left unencrypted on that hard drive. Unencrypted. Somebody from the Veterans Association years ago lost, a few 100,000 people's personal information from a laptop theft. We can go on and on with these stories. We want to focus on the protection. Now, here's one that was good. When a major bank was shipping its backup tapes of customer accounts through a nationwide shipping company, I won't say which one, somehow the tapes got lost. And that meant all the customer information that they had on backup was now in somebody's hands. And the good news, that was encrypted. So the bank didn't go into panic mode that all of their customers had just been stolen from them because of the encryption involved. So that's where we focus on full protection. Now, by the way, I did work for that bank a few months after that story broke. And I asked them out of curiosity, because I was working with the IT group, if they ever found them, and they did find the tapes in the boxes in some farm in the New England area. It was it was like, I don't know how they ended up, and nobody knows how it ended up, but all these boxes of backup tapes were delivered to a barn and put in the back of a barn, not even at the house. So I just found that interesting. Like, you need a little bit of the rest of that story. Okay, where was I at? Yep, talking about the protection of information and how that's a focus for us in security governance. Now, the risks involved with the security of information are going to continue to grow. In fact, that's because of the sophistication of programs that people can use to be hackers. In fact, we used to have this chart that showed how the danger of the attacks is continually rising. It means getting more and more complex. But the skill of the person that's running the attack was getting lower and lower, meaning they didn't need to know much more than to download something from the internet, open it up, put in your IP address, and click a button that says kill. All right, that was, and it works. It did its job. So, right, the risks are going to continue to grow. As organizations maintain their competitive edge in the global economy, they have to consider those risks that are involved and the rising number of threats to their information as they try to reach out and get more and more into that global economy, because that's going to be more and more exposure. There's also compounded by the changes and updates that we have to existing laws and regulations regarding on how protection of information assets is supposed to be done. So, and by the way, those laws of protection are usually because of the growing risks and the need to, in some cases, force companies to follow a certain minimum of best practices. So information security has been a growing concern to a lot of organizations. If you just consider the number of systems and processes that are used globally to handle information along with the risks of attacks, then you can understand why this information security governance has become increasingly critical. Good information security governance is more than good business. It's also your exercise of due diligence. And look at it this way again. If you had a bunch of customer information, customer credit cards, and it was stolen from you through a series of hacks, the question is going to be is, did you have good information security governance? Can you prove that you were following best practices? Can you show through auditing that you were in compliance? Because if you can't do any of those things, then the question is, did you do your due diligence of what it takes to protect that information, my information that I shared with your company? Because if you didn't, you have some increasing liability for me to be able to sue your company to get the reparation of damages from your lack of following a good security governance program. So what are the benefits then of good IS security governance? Well, they start off with what I was just saying. A reduction of civil and legal liability as a consequence, whether it's because you provided bad information or lost private information. You gain a benefit of providing an assurance of policy and standards compliance. You can reduce concerns about business operations by lowering risks to an acceptable level. You can provide a structure and framework to be able to optimize what limited resources you have for security. You can instill more confidence that critical decisions are made on, are not made on altered information. Now that would be, real quick, the quick little things that people used to do. Back when companies used to, on the internet, store the shopping cart information in a cookie on your desktop, or on somewhere on your desktop, not the actual desktop, but somewhere in the file system. And folks found that information, and so they'd be ordering flowers, and then they'd go change the cookie so that the flowers only cost a penny, and then finish the order. So a decision was made, not a critical decision in that case, but a decision was made to charge you the dollar on your credit card or the penny because the information was altered. That's the type of thing we're trying to do, is get confidence that those types of decisions aren't made on bad information. Providing accountability for business activities, that's important too, especially if you have partnerships, mergers, or other acquisitions. I talked before about a credit card processing company that wanted to start, processing another bank's credit cards, and they were the ones that provided the merchants with those little boxes they stripe your cards through, and so technically, when you swipe that card, it doesn't go right to your bank; it goes to this credit card processing center. And that processing center then connects to the bank to verify funds and all that. That kind of partnership required a lot of accountability. And by having good security governance, one of the benefits is we can provide and show that accountability. Some of the other outcomes of security governance, things like a strategic alignment, being able to align information security, as we said before, many times before, with business strategies to meet the organization's objectives. It working with the reduction of risk through risk management to reduce the visual impacts on information resources to an acceptable level. To gain value of the delivery, right, and, which is again back to optimizing the investment. We can see performance measurements. We can, one of the goals of or outcomes of security governance is that we can measure, monitor, and report on the information security processes and how those processes meet the SMART objectives, which are the specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound objectives. Resource management is another outcome where we get efficient and effective use of the information security. And again, process integration, which is the integration of management's assurance processes into the security. Now, integration is the idea of integrating all the relevant assurance factors to make sure that the processes are operating as intended from end to end. The following should be considered to achieve real integration. Number one is to determine all the organizational assurance functions that are there. Coordinate those assurance functions to have more complete security. In other words, don't treat them all as standing alone. In today's world, many of them overlap. I made the example of firewalls and intrusion detection. They overlap in that they're looking at the same data, the same packets, traveling on the network, but doing different things, but enhancing each other's performance. And having just said that, one of the other ones then is to create overlaps between the roles and responsibilities of those assurance functions. Now, in the discussion of effective information security governance, the goal of information security, again, is to support organizations in their objectives, making it also of good value to the organization. That means there should be a framework to help guide the development and management of such information security programs. Now, again, we're talking about kind of this planning, the development and management. The framework might consist of things like having a comprehensive security strategy. You might also make sure you have the security policies there to address each aspect of the strategy for controls and regulation. The framework should have an organizational structure that is devoid of conflicts of interest and should have sufficient monitoring processes to ensure that you can check on compliance and to get feedback about that process. As I mentioned earlier, that when we look at governance, it should be a top-down approach. That means that really the board of directors and senior management are the ones who effectively have governance over information security. The upper management should know about the organization's information assets and how critical that information is to their business, especially in today's world. And this is also probably a good place to have a comprehensive risk assessment and a business impact analysis done on the IS or the information services, so we can see how that equates to the priorities of what it takes for this company or organization to be successful. Remember, the term top-down means that we're putting these policies into place, this governance at the top, so that there's real power in the policies and procedures and what comes down from the top level to basically affect how the company is run. Now, senior management then should be involved with the effective security governance. In other words, they should lead by example. That means that in the senior management, they should have documents that talk about what the security governance is. Maybe penalties for what happens if you're not in compliance. They have to be defined. These things have to be communicated and enforced. And again, it has to be from the top down. Part of the roles and responsibilities of management might be to create a steering committee, which would be a group of senior representatives of each of the affected groups that are working together to achieve consensus on priorities and trade-offs. Now, what's that mean? Priorities and trade-offs. Priorities start off with saying, I'm not going to come in from my group and say, my group is the most important to this company because we order the staples for office supplies. And have another group say, hey, we're the ones that run the firewall. We're in the security. Without us, your information, right? Okay, so you get the picture, right? We have to be able to come to a consensus and come up with a series of priorities. And sometimes there's a trade-off on what different priorities are. But that's part of what the steering committee's job is to do, is without fighting, infighting, is to be able to achieve the consensus on those types of things. One thing to do is to make sure you have a Chief Information Security Officer. You should have one, whether or not there's anybody officially with that title, but a person whose job lies on the technical side. And of course, technically you could say that the CEO is the Chief Information Security Officer, because ultimately the CEO or president has all the legal responsibilities about what that company does. But again, to have a person with the title who can help in the decision-making process of best how to deal with security issues, with all of this planning. So anyway, so consider having that as a titled responsible position. And again, it should be one that's at the top. The last thing to look at here is the enterprise architecture, and that's the responsible part of documenting the IT assets in a structured manner to be able to facilitate having an understanding, to be able to manage and plan for IT investments. This can also facilitate the information for the current state and to help you in the optimization for moving towards a future state or having a roadmap for changes and improvements in technologies. One of the things about an enterprise architecture is it's designed to help clarify what might be a complex set of technology choices that you have to face in today's organization by letting you see it at that kind of 10,000 foot view and be able to see how different components can interact with each other.